Good evening, everyone, and welcome. It's my pleasure to invite Taylor Power Smith to come to the stage and give a welcome to country.
Stand there so everyone can see you. Nankana miuna kawanualia napala alia yungantalia yakanantalia kuma. Nainari Taylor Tipple Power Smith. You say? Nainari Tiana.
Nainari Tiana.
Yalaka nai pani ngai chul taikatena periko wangandi. Ngad lugana miuna kama mi pa yama yama. Ngai cha mankalankala. Yaicha mianaku. Ngai cha ngadli waratiakati. Matuichanga ngai chul kamami. Ngai cha kuma. Ladies and gentlemen, uncles, aunties, brothers and sisters, Nāmani, are you all good? Yes. So Ghana, when I say Nāmani, if you're good, you would say Mani ai. So Nāmani? Mani. Beautiful. My name is Taylor Tipple Power Smith, and this is Tiana Power, my daughter. Tipple in Ghana means the spark, and I was given that name after my mother, Katrina Galabina Power, which means the lover of fire. Today we are meeting on sacred Ghana land. We pay our respects to all Ghana people. We pay our respects to all First Nations people and all of our elders, both black and white. Let us sit and talk together. Let us eat and drink together. Let us sing and dance together. Let us laugh and cry together, and let us heal and grow together, so that our children and their children's children can feel the wind and the breeze, find shelter in the storm and sunshine in the rain. But most importantly, so they can feel the warmth of a campfire that we have created for them. Now, Tiana wanted to teach you a little song and dance today, but seeing as we're a bit squashed up, we're not going to get you to dance, so lucky for you all. But we are going to teach you a little song in Ghana. It's really simple, and then we're hoping that you'll be able to sing it back to us as well. So we'll say it first, very easy, and then if you could say it back, and then we'll sing it all together. All right, so it just goes, we'll just say it for us. So it just goes, Nina Mani, Mani ai, Wantinina, Wadliana. So can we give that a go? Yeah, cool. Everyone usually gets really excited, it's great. All right. So I'll say it first, we'll say it first, and then you repeat it after us. So, Nina Mani, Mani ai, Wantinina, Wadliana. Beautiful. Then we say, Mani na budni Ghana yartana. Remember what that means?
Welcome to Ghana country.
Ngachalia, thank you, and Nakara, goodbye.
How special was that? Wonderful. Thank you very much. Welcome everyone, and I too would like to acknowledge that this land we meet on today is the traditional lands for the Ghana people, and we respect their spiritual relationship with their country. My name is DiMonte. I chair the Social Capital Residency Program, and tonight is a very special and sold out event, which is wonderful to see everybody here this evening. Before I proceed, just a few housekeeping matters. If anybody needs the bathrooms, they're at the back of the room. There's a big sign, blue sign I think, behind that bright light. Exits, there's an exit here, and of course there's the exit or the entry that you came through, which is also an exit obviously. And tonight, if you do have your mobile phones, you don't need to turn them off, because I think there will be some hashtags to be used, and they're going to be on the screen in a minute. And in their programs, Moira tells me. Thank you very much. So if you feel the need to drop a tweet, please do so. A very special and warm welcome to you all, and a special welcome to our VIP guest, Minister Honourable David Spears, Minister for Environment and Water, and tonight representing the Premier. Welcome and thank you. Chair of the Don Dunstan Foundation Board of Directors, the Honourable Reverend Dr Lynn Arnold AO, welcome. And Chair of the Don Dunstan Foundation Committee of Management, Cathy King. Thank you all for being here. The format for tonight is quite straightforward. I will ask David Pearson to come to the lectern very shortly just to do a bit of an introduction. Then we will hear from Ilse, her oration, and from the conclusion of her visit. And then we have a great opportunity to have a panel of 3 guests and Ilse up here on the stage with me with some prepared questions, so they're not going to be ad-libbing. Well, they might ad-lib a few answers. And then an opportunity for the audience to pose some questions to all 4. So if you've got a piece of paper or a good memory, think about some questions. There's an opportunity towards the end to ask some questions, and we'll look forward to that part of the evening. So without further ado, David Pearson, Executive Director of the Don Dunstan Foundation.
Well, hello. Thank you everyone for being here. It's great to see such a large group of friendly faces and in such a wonderful venue. I just wanted to say a few words about Ilse's visit over the last 2 weeks and the broader journey we've been on with the Thinkers in Residence program. In her time with us, Ilse has had a number of roundtables, including on the commercialisation of research, on the innovation ecosystem in South Australia. She spoke at the Shared Value Conference in Sydney last week. She did a social enterprise masterclass at the New Ventures Institute, and she's met with political, community and business leaders. All up, over the last 15 days, she engaged with over 1,100 people through 45 meetings, roundtables, dinners, forums, workshops, conferences and 1 wine tour. So congratulations, Ilse, for being here and still standing. I think that deserves a round of applause. So Ilse's visit here comes off the back of a number of other visitors we've had through the Thinkers program. We had Alison Hewitt, a world-leading social innovator and systems change expert who visited us late last year. We had Susie Souza, a social entrepreneur from our sister city in Austin, Texas, who's done a lot of work on using technology to increase social impact. We had Vic Strecker, who was an expert in purpose in our lives, in community and business, and the connection all of that has to the latest scientific research. And we had Alison's second visit, where she helped us to really focus on the developments and the initiatives of all the partners in the program to implement what we're learning through this program. And so Ilse's done an incredible amount of work over the last 2 weeks. She's helped build on our collective efforts in South Australia to grow the purpose economy. So the purpose economy I wanted to say a few words about, starting with what is it? You can define it in a number of ways, but it is really at the heart of what we focus the Thinkers program at the moment. It can be defined by industry, i.e. health, education, care, and the creative sectors. The parts of the economy that we don't often see as industries and drivers of employment, but have in fact been the biggest job creators in the recent past in South Australia and will continue to be so in the foreseeable future. One example of this is the little known fact that the creative and arts sector employs more people in South Australia than the mining community, or the mining industry. Another is that the National Disability Insurance Scheme, which will be the single biggest employer in the northern parts of our city for the foreseeable future, is seen as a social program but not often as much as an economic driver, which it absolutely is. So we can define the purpose economy by industry, but that's not just the extent of it. It can also be defined by business models and increasingly hybrid business models. And the barriers between what we consider to be the charity sector and the business community are breaking down. And what's left in this middle convergent space is what we call the purpose economy. And the purpose economy, community organisations aren't the only ones who care about doing good, and businesses don't just care about making a profit. There's increasingly a messy middle, as Alison Hewitt calls it. And this isn't to say there isn't a role for traditional community organisations, there absolutely is. And this isn't to say that the market can fix every problem, because it can't. But there is still an incredibly important role for government to play in funding community services and regulating those markets. But there is a space in the middle that is growing and that we believe has a huge role for the future of our community and its place in the world. And so finally, you can define the purpose economy by both industry, by business model type, but also by activity and what it is that we do in our lives that gives us meaning. And this is one of the key lessons that we learned from Vic Strecker, who was here, and that people are thinking less about what sector they want to work in and more about what gives them meaning in their lives. Paul Madden, who's here tonight from the Wyatt Trust, summed this up recently really well when he said that the focus is shifting from students from what they want to do when they grow up to who they want to be. And it's a much more interesting question, and it's what we're focusing on through the purpose economy work. And so this is a trend that's increasing across all generations, but one trend that we've been particularly cognizant of through the Thinkers program is that this trend is most prominent amongst millennials. So looking across all of these areas of definition, it's clear that the purpose economy is an emergent concept. It's something that's new, it's hard to get your head around, the language isn't quite right, but what it is something that we think South Australia is incredibly well positioned to lead in. That's why we focus the Thinkers program on it, not just Ilse's visits, but across all of the Thinkers visits that we've had. And many of you may remember when we started the Thinkers program, we talked a lot about the social economy. And I'm looking at Matt Anderson, just off the top of my head, as one of the people who pioneered that concept and that work. But thanks to some of the advice from Susie Souza and Vic Strecker, we've tweaked the language to be more inclusive and to talk about purpose more. And we did this because while we have always been leaders in social innovation in South Australia, and dating right back to our founding as a province and before with our Kaurna traditional owners, we wanted to recognise the leadership role that our state has played in the cultural and environmental life of our nation as well. The fact that we sell almost 60% of the nation's festival tickets here in South Australia is one example, or the fact that our homes, the proportion of homes with the solar panels is greater here, not just is greater in South Australia, not just in Australia, but across the world. We have the highest proportion of those. So the purpose economy therefore gives us an umbrella to align all of our efforts culturally, environmentally, socially and economically. And this is important because all of these things are increasingly interconnected. There are developments in every city and industry around the world that if you look up closely, they may seem unrelated. But when you take a step back and when you take a global view, as our thinkers have helped us to do, we can see that there is a pattern. And this pattern is about creating purpose for people in their lives. And the convergent nature of these things and the opportunities they provide will be the topic of Ilse's conversation and oration tonight. Given the context of her, and she will do this in the context of her experiences leading Mars, the innovation district in the heart of Toronto, built on the site of a former hospital, is the context in which she'll give this speech tonight. The oration will take place also in the context of the 2 weeks that she spent here, but building on the residencies of all the thinkers and residents that we've had before us. But Ilse's oration will be the last specialist thinker in residence as part of the social capital residencies, and her report will be released later this year. In July, we'll have the final visit of Alison Hewitt, our primary thinker, as part of the social capital residencies. But we know that the work of growing the purpose economy in South Australia is not done. In fact, in many ways, we're just getting started. And so I'm really pleased to share with you tonight that we will be extending the focus of the purpose economy through the Thinkers program into the future. And we'll be bringing out Guy Turnbull, a disability and cooperatives expert from the United Kingdom, a couple of times later this year to help us focus on the disability insurance scheme and how we can make that work for the people who are the recipients of that scheme, but also for our community and our economy, and putting cooperative business models at the heart of that work. So we'll be exploring that later in the year, and we'll be exploring further thinkers for 2019 and to understand how we can grow a more purposeful economy here in South Australia. And we'd love to talk to you about that. But one thing that we've tried really hard to do in taking over the Thinkers program is to make sure we don't just talk. We've tried to make sure that we see action come out of these residencies and that the lessons we learn are implemented. And so I wanted to just take a moment to quickly share with you some of the initiatives that the partners in the Thinkers and Residents program have been implementing as we go along, not waiting till the end of the process, but getting on with the business of making this a reality. So some of those partners include Torrens University and Free Range Futures and a number of other leading B corporations who are working together to try and achieve a goal of at least 20 new B Corps in South Australia by 2020. B Corps being for-benefit certified companies, so it's sort of like what Fair Trade Coffee is to companies for a certification scheme. If you're not sure what they are, I'd encourage you to talk to Nick Crowther over there, who was the key evangelist for B Corps in South Australia. We're working with the Stretton Centre and the Northern Economic Plan for setting up a Northern Purpose Business Network so that we can grow the purpose economy in one of our most disadvantaged communities. We're working with Housing SA to make sure that we can use procurement to provide employment opportunities for people who are in housing trust properties. Carers SA are leading some work with a range of other organisations on innovative approaches to using transport in the care sector. We're working with the Social Impact Investment Network of South Australia to develop an impact investment plan so that social innovators can access the finance they need to scale their impact. We're working with Community Living SA and Taxi to explore the idea of establishing a cooperative business model to share front-end and back-end services for the disability insurance scheme so that people who are using that scheme can better able to traverse that market. We're working with the South Australian Centre for Economic Studies to survey the social enterprises in South Australia, working with Taxi and the Wyatt Trust to better understand the social innovation ecosystem, and we're working with organisations like Helping Hand, Volunteering SA, Regional Development Australia and the RAA and all of our public universities to work on ways that we can grow the purpose economy and use what we're learning from our thinkers in residence. Now I know that's quite a list, and there's actually more to it. And what I encourage you to do tonight when we finish, there will be drinks. Please hang around and talk to some of those people who have been part of this process. And let's turn this venue that we really have so many hopes for into the collaborative space that we wanted to see it to be. And in the spirit of that collaboration and growing the purpose economy, I just want to do a quick shout out to a couple of the social enterprises that have helped us activate this space tonight. Sarah Gunn and the amazing team at GoGo Events have helped stage tonight's event, so thank you so much to them. Moira Deslands from CoLab for Good and Chooks has helped organise tonight's event, along with Harvest Fair, who provides some of the gifts for the speakers tonight. Harvest Fair used the power of good food to advance the cause of gender equity. And the awesome crew at the Northern Sound System have provided the AV that's working pretty well so far, so thanks to those guys. And can I also acknowledge that we're in the home of Kick Coffee, and Louise Nobbs is a pioneer in the social enterprise sector in South Australia. They're trying to end youth unemployment one coffee at a time. But also, one of the most important things I like to do is thank all the partners in the Thinkers program, to thank Renewal for helping us be here tonight, and particularly to thank Ilse for the amazing work that you've done. It's been such a privilege to be part of this process with you. You are an incredible human being and your intellect is towering. Everyone will get to see that shortly, not to build expectations too much, but thank you very much, Ilse. You've been an absolute pleasure to work with. And really the last thing I wanted to say is that the Don Dunstan Foundation, we exist to inspire action for a fairer world. That's our purpose, and we hope that tonight we've done that for you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, David. Action-packed. So it now brings us to the oration, and my pleasure to introduce Ilse Treurnicht to the stage, and providing some background to Ilse, which I have here. Ilse is one of Canada's leading women in innovation, commercialisation, and under her leadership of Mars Discovery District, both the local and national economies of Toronto and Canada have grown through the application of intentional synergies, being built across the whole startup ecosystem. She has led and fostered initiatives to identify and address gaps in the ecosystem, for example, creating a single commercialisation storefront for academic institutions to enable licensing and industry co-development, and championing an inclusive and diverse ecosystem and systems and funding mechanisms to match. Tonight, Ilse is going to share some of what she has learnt, as David has mentioned, and with her vast connections of over 1,000 people that she's met with, she has a really good insight and deep insight into some of the opportunities that we have here in South Australia. And we really appreciate the gift that she is giving to us tonight. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Rob, for that kind introduction. Thank you also to David and the team for being such wonderful hosts over the last 2 weeks. We've all been busy. And of course, my thanks to the Don Dunstan Foundation and all of the partners who've supported this residency so generously. It is a truly extraordinary program. It's a jewel, and personally, I feel very honored to be part of the incredible group of people who have walked this path before. I also would like to thank all of you who I have met over the last 2 weeks, and you've been so generous in sharing your ideas and your experiences and your hopes and dreams with me, and it was a wonderful conversation. And thank you all for being here tonight. This residency has been exploring, as you heard a bit from David, the intersection between innovation and the purpose economy. And really the question, David framed it very eloquently, but really the question, that we've been thinking about is how can the levers of innovation, talent, research, startup companies, capital, place, be used to not only grow the economy, but actually benefit society more broadly. And as you heard, and as we all know from our own experience, the innovation ecosystem and the purpose ecosystem often function as sort of independent orbits from each other, or with just minimal overlap. Because in our shortcut way of making sense of this fast-changing world, we typically think of innovation as growing the economy. It is how we bring greater productivity and efficiency into our work, improving our quality of life, making our life more entertaining, often with the help of some cool gadgets. And for tangible advances in the hard technology sectors, such as medicine or manufacturing, self-driving cars. But in reality, of course, innovation is so much broader. It impacts absolutely every corner of our society and the life of every citizen. And we can no longer hide from the impact of highly innovative tech behemoths on our democracies and growing inequality, of new fast-moving technologies on workforce disruption, and of many important businesses and industries in our economies on the health of our planet. We also have no hope of solving society's most intractable problems: climate change, healthcare for an aging population, the crisis of social isolation and well-being, youth unemployment, or restoring the legitimacy of government, to name just a few that are often in the social economy bucket, relying, as we have in the past, on the talent and the institutions and the money and the tools available to the social economy, or without fully utilizing technology and innovation. So it's not surprising that there's growing interest in bringing these two worlds a little bit closer together. Oops. I was struck recently by a comment made by Tim Cook, who's the celebrated CEO of Apple. And he shared his journey to find purpose in his own life with MIT graduating students at their commencement. And he talked about how in that period of trying to find his purpose, he kept adding stuff to his resume and wondering, is that all there is? And then he claims that he found his purpose when he arrived at Apple and realized, and he put it this way, he said, the truth is that we all have the same purpose and that we should all quit looking. Our purpose is to serve humanity. The CEO of Apple. Now, depending on how much you love your Apple products, you may like that comment or you may be deeply offended by it. I know I had a whole range of reactions. But everywhere, businesses, foundations, investors, some very wonderful models emerging on the investor slide, DBL for double bottom line, and hybrid entities that stand between traditional venture capital and foundations. And most excitingly, entrepreneurs, particularly young ones, are increasingly moving into Allison's middle space, that place where you can be truly innovative, but with a purpose. And that is also increasingly a space actively pursued by policymakers to try and develop more inclusive economic growth strategies. However, I wonder if we shouldn't come at this marriage a little more directly. And this question sort of surfaced for me again during the last 2 weeks in Adelaide. And it seems worth pausing on for a moment just before we get into the specifics of the residency. And imagine what would happen if In this extraordinary time of hyperconnectivity, of convergence between sectors, between technologies, and between public and private domains, all of it fueled by this incredibly fluid pool of talent and capital, which in turn accelerates absolutely everything. What would happen with that on the one hand, and these increasingly complex, multidimensional challenges on the other? We could put purpose, much more at the center of our elusive efforts to seek economic growth in a low-growth environment. What would we see if we started to measure the performance of our economy through this lens of purpose? What would happen if we designed our innovation strategies to purposely focus on the big challenges facing people in our community and beyond? Now, perhaps not surprisingly, this question brings us right back to the basics of innovation and that fundamental question of why is all this stuff so important? Why does it matter? Why are governments and businesses investing enormous amounts of money developing their innovation strategies? Let's take a really mainstream definition of innovation. Harvard Business Review, doesn't get any more mainstream than that. Innovation is invention that creates value. We have another one we use in Canada, new and better ways of doing valued things. Well, who are we creating value for? What do we value as individuals, as companies, as organizations, as institutions, as communities, as countries? And perhaps the really challenging question in today's economy, who really creates value in the economy? Do we value them? Who redistributes value or extracts and even destroys value? How are they rewarded? These questions challenge us to think about our innovation decisions in a much more holistic manner. Generating growth and profit, yes, but also looking at the impact on the economy and the planet. Ensuring that as many people as possible benefit or derive value from our innovation efforts, rather than just a few. Think beyond winners and losers. And in particular, look beyond that narrow lens of GDP growth as the only measure of progress. And also consider quality of life and the sustainability of our hot, crowded planet. What would happen if every company thought like this? Now, to be clear, this is not a watered down or a squishy view of innovation as a driver of human progress. This is, in fact, a far more ambitious view of innovation and its potential to grow, to drive growth, and the value that it can generate over the longer term. Coming together to tackle these really incredibly complex challenges requires all the entrepreneurial energy, the urgency, the discipline, and the drive of achieving more traditional innovation metrics. But what it does is it relies on a much broader range of contributors. It draws on a much broader range of tools and capabilities, including technology, yes, but technology is not the main point. And it requires entirely new models of collaboration to create shared value between the public and the private sector. And I would argue the world really needs this kind of innovation right now. We're stuck on so many fronts. Business as usual is not working. Government as usual is not working. Education as usual is not working. Leadership as usual is not working. And innovation as usual is not working. And doing more of the same is not going to get us where we need to be. And change is in the air. Companies, even highly innovative ones, solely focused on shareholder value, are increasingly being challenged by their employees and by their customers, and struggling with the social license in the communities in which they serve. And young people are making their voices increasingly heard by where they choose to live and work, what they spend their money on, and who they vote for. And this wave is only going to grow. And my own perspective is that countries like Canada and Australia have a special contribution to make in this broader view of innovation. As small jurisdictions, in fact, in the global context, this may even be our competitive advantage, our way of controlling our growth destiny, because we face very big challenges when we try to go head-to-head and compete at scale in traditional sectors like biotech, for example. Which brings me back to the inquiry of this residency and some of the questions that it raised. It starts, of course, with trying to just understand the broader innovation ecosystem in the region against that backdrop of global dynamics. But how vibrant is it today? How actively engaged are the educational institutions, established businesses, governments, nonprofit organizations in participating in that ecosystem, but more importantly, in building that ecosystem? Who are the investors and what are they focused on? And zeroing in a little bit deeper, how can we make better use of our strengths in research? What new networks and collaboration models can be used to foster and accelerate the growth of a more cohesive, a more integrated ecosystem? And the question that I've really been grappling with is how can we maximize the impact of the region's hard and soft infrastructure, from its digital networks, its research institutes, its co-working spaces, its accelerator programs, its social innovation communities, its innovation precincts, and its festivals and the assets of the creative sector on the economy and prosperity of the region. And specifically, of course, the question of how can the development of this incredible site play a role in that strategy? And how does it tie into a network of precincts and hubs already working to ensure coherence and strengthening of everybody's efforts? And the other big question, of course, is do we have the talent we need? Are we developing, reskilling, using the talent we have? How do we attract new talent? This is really the most important question, because innovation is all powered by people. And it's about problem solving, and you need the creative, skilled, and aspiring people at the bottom of that. And then leadership. Where does leadership come from, and what does leadership even mean in an ecosystem context? Now, as you heard a little bit, I come to this inquiry from Toronto, and time spent in all kinds of different bits of the ecosystem, from science to startups, a little bit of accidental investor. But most importantly, and I think the thing that's been probably most interesting to people, is the experience of building the Mars precinct in Toronto over the last 13 years. And not just developing and activating the precinct, but also connecting it to the wider community and the region to optimize its impact and really try to get to scale. Not surprisingly, the conversations I've had this last 2 weeks feel very familiar. There are just so many similarities between Canada and Australia. Our large, floppy geographies, small local markets, reliance and dependence on exports, economies in transition from traditional resources, traditional manufacturing, our modest populations counterweighted with incredibly strong talent base, strong educational institutions, and those institutions attract talent from all around the world. Our wonderfully high quality of life, strong civil society institutions, economic and social stability. The similarities are actually uncanny, but you have better weather for sure. And of course, this visit just scratched the surface, but what struck me immediately upon arrival here is the absolutely enormous opportunity that is here right now. And conversations with a wide range of stakeholders really reinforced this recognition, because everyone expressed the desire to make the ecosystem stronger, to be a part of making it stronger, and the desire to see Adelaide and South Australia flourish. However, a shared view of what flourish means and how we get there seems a bit more tentative. Which brings us to this extraordinary place and the opportunity that it presents for the reimagining and transformation of this site, and that playing a catalytic role in shaping a big forward-looking agenda, not just for Adelaide, but for South Australia as a whole. Now, leading cities around the world are developing innovation districts and hubs to galvanize their innovation ecosystems and to translate the stuff that's in the heads of their academic researchers and their young, talented populations into tangible products and services that will build a new generation of businesses and social enterprises. We know that young people concentrate in these cities, and as you heard, they are as much motivated by the excitement of new technologies and new business models, new ways of doing things, as they are fueled by purpose. And increasingly, these precincts are becoming gateways for the regions to access global markets and for global partners to find and engage with local strengths. But very few places, when I look around, have a combination of three things. First, strong foundations with really clear strengths. Here in water tech, creative industries, green power, healthcare, agri-tech, to name just a few, and of course, your truly global powerhouse in the wine industry. And I love the wonderful history of this region since its inception being a little bit of an experiment to create a better society. The second really important piece is those very compelling fundamentals, including an excellent education system, livability, and affordability, all within this creative and cultural district. But the third piece, a site of this magnitude, at this scale, and potentially available right now in the heart of the city, directly adjacent to the universities, the creative sector, the business district, surrounded by parkland, on which to develop an innovation engine for the next century. It's truly an extraordinary moment. And not surprisingly, there's been a lot of interest in the Mars journey because of the clear similarities, having even started also on a decommissioned hospital site. So it's funny, these conversations have prompted me to think back, remember stuff from the early days, and trying to tease out what really made a difference for us. And as often is the case, you see the path that you traveled much clearer when you look over your shoulder. But let me highlight a few key elements. There's Mars. The founders of Mars articulated an incredibly bold, long-term ambition. It inspired people to get involved. It raised our expectations of ourselves. Since the very beginning, the founders and the board provided incredibly strong, catalytic, nonpartisan, positive civic leadership. Mars would not have happened without this extraordinary man, Dr. John Evans. The strategy to deliver on that big vision was shaped iteratively by a relentless focus on data, global and local evidence, and adapting as the model took shape. It was all about emergence. There was absolutely no recipe book to follow at the time. Today there exists more examples, which I think is an advantage. But governance needs to accommodate this reality of an adaptive strategy. It's at the heart of the innovation process. And then implementation. Jeff Bezos famously said, ideas are easy, execution is hard. And it's especially true in this kind of model. We developed a unique entity dedicated to delivering on that vision. A new kind of organization, nonprofit, neutral, agile, with a bias to action, trying things and adjusting as we needed. And learning, 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 always learning. And in the heart of all that, collaboration was at the core of everything, both inside Mars and outside. We leveraged coalitions of the willing to get moving. We actively developed our own capabilities and the capabilities of our community to foster multi-stakeholder collaboration and delivering outcomes from those efforts. Trust and results are at the heart of effective collaboration. We focused on people. People power innovation, and we should never lose sight of that. And diversity supercharges innovation. And real work is required to mobilize the diversity of the ecosystem. And profit and purpose was at the core from day one, intentionally and boldly, reflecting the DNA of the founders, but also our desire to carve out a unique and proudly Canadian path. This was not a Silicon Valley wannabe project. So given the timing and the scale, launching this site could stimulate a much broader process of creating alignment around a shared ambition for this region, and it can create the mechanism to make that ambition a reality. It will strain your collaboration muscles, as it cannot be done by any one actor in the ecosystem alone. It will succeed only if it is a product of the bigger community. And then, in turn, it will make entirely new things possible for everyone, unleashing an amazing new energy. It will also test your collective courage. We know that our world has a very short attention span, focused on the here and the now. But remember, the full impact of this precinct will not materialize in the tenure of this new government, or in the tenure or the term of a current vice chancellor, or of any business CEO or leader in the community. What you choose to do with this site, or what you choose to avoid doing in this site because it's hard, the consequences will only be felt in the opportunities that are available to your children and their children decades in the future. That is the curse of living in a fast-moving innovation world. And this project, which will take a monumental effort from the whole ecosystem, presents a once-in-a-generation opportunity to shift the region's innovation trajectory. It provides an on-ramp to become a global player, but to do so on your own terms. Most importantly, and this is most importantly, if it is truly anchored in innovation, it has the potential to anchor capacity to continue to reinvent the economy of the region again and again in the future, and to do so right here. If you miss the chance to fully capitalize on this moment, you will play catch-up for a long time. I honestly think it's that black and white. The choice is that brutal. Please don't leave it to chance. It's clearly incredibly important for Adelaide and for South Australia. But more importantly, the world really needs you to do something amazing with it. to innovate with purpose. Thank you very much. Thank you for welcoming me here.
Thank you very much, Ilse. There was so much in that. I am just absolutely amazed the insight that you've had in such a short period of time here, and being right on the money from my perspective, the bold aspiration and the challenge and risk that we have going forward. So once again, thank you very much. Very insightful. So now let me introduce you to three panellists who will come to this. I think they're going to get mic'd up, and while they do that, I'll introduce them to you. Christine Molitor is the CEO of Scope Global, a local business in South Australia, providing project management support throughout our region to students, universities, companies and national governments, all seeking to build a prosperous future in partnership with Australia. Christine also has a long history of leadership in the not-for-profit sector as a immediate past chair of the Can Do Group, one of South Australia's largest charities, and with specialist expertise in sensory services and products. She is currently also a board member of On Sight for All, where leading Australian ophthalmologists provide support and services to communities in developing nations in our neighbourhood. Also, Natalie Ford, who is Acting Director of Research and Innovation Services at the University of South Australia. Natalie is an experienced leader who has worked in both the private and public sectors across a number of industries, including higher education, agriculture, training and ICT. She focuses on developing strategic and sustainable partnership models based on trust and the delivery of economic and societal value. Together with her team, she has responsibility for supporting UniSA's partner engagement activities and the diversification of UniSA's research funding base. And our third and final panellist is Louise Nobes, founder and CEO of Kick Innovation. Louise is an award-winning social entrepreneur, founder and CEO with a 15-year background in social work and business. Louise is highly recognised for her ability to work with disadvantaged young people and to inspire them to create their own solutions out of poverty. To achieve this, Louise created Kick, which is a brand-led company that creates jobs through co-designing business solutions with young people. Since August 2016, Kick has opened 3 Kick coffee stores, retail and commercial cleaning company. Led from the top, Kick inspires a culture of curiosity, disruption and purpose. So please welcome our 3 panellists. Now I think, take that away. Welcome.
Thank you.
Now, I'm going to go with some questions with our panellists first, so you get a chance, Ilse, to relax for a bit. But we'll get back to you because we have some questions for you. So firstly, a question to all our panellists. Given you've now heard from Ilse, what challenges are you facing when you think about building the future on purpose? Natalie, we'll start with you because you're next to me.
Thanks, Rob. Look, I found it incredibly inspiring to listen to your oration then, Ilse. Thank you so much. A couple of things ran through my mind as I was listening to it, and one, particularly when you were talking about purpose, is the shared understanding of what purpose is. I think education is the business that I work in, being from a university. And I think the power of people being educated and understanding the potential of purpose is something that we need to really think hard about as an economy here in the state to really unlock the potential of what we've just heard. I also really heard strongly that the need for big challenge thinking, the need to think at scale. I have the amazing fortune of working with some brilliant people at UniSA, and one who I work with a lot is a professor who is working to understand better innovation from a historic point of view, to understand now how Australia can better harness innovation to drive productivity. And curiously, as you were talking about the purpose that we need to have to really drive a purpose-based economy, he's managed to find that there are 7 key things that we have innovated around in history. It's food, it's water, mobility, communications, shelter. I'm going to get I've actually got some sheet notes here, and health and energy. So if we think about those fundamentals, nothing much has changed. And I think when we look at what everyone else is doing and then add to it, we tend to get into a cycle of, as you say, continuous improvement, over-emphasis on technology, rather than looking at how technology can be brought to life through those challenges to make the world a better place. So they're my first thoughts. Sorry, probably monopolised a bit.
No, that's fine. Louise.
Thank you very much. You know, I like to pose a question and a challenge to all of us. I think when we think of for purpose and who is driving that, where are those that are most disadvantaged placed in that? I think for us at Kick Innovation, we really try to strive around how we can close the gap of information and how we can start to look at not only the most privileged people, creating the solutions for the most disadvantaged. So how do young people, in our case, or other people in more low socioeconomic communities, are really part of the innovation? And innovation for us is a process. So we look at co-design and we look at how people can be at the centre. And I know that that's all language that we use a lot, but actually how can we drive that right to the core and actually start those that are finding that they're in the most disadvantaged, how they can actually alleviate and exit themselves out of their own situation through the power of technology and innovation. I'll provide just a small example. So we only co-design businesses. We work with young people first before we have a business. We don't open up a shop and say we're going to employ some young people and that's our engagement to the purpose economy. In the second group of young people I taught, I gave them a challenge, disrupt. I don't want to see the next coffee brand just only being coffee. And with that challenge, within 5 weeks, they designed and delivered another business strategy in retail. And using a simple 3D printer and using vacuum forming and some software technology, they were actually able to bring job creation and provided more jobs. And actually now we're on Cheapest Chip stores, we're in Tony and Mark supermarkets, and they're very proud that this is a way in which we can enter into global markets. So how do we actually keep, so that's the challenge I think we all face, is how do we keep the people that we're trying to create the most purpose for at the heart of what we do?
Excellent. Christine.
Thanks, Rob. When I think about what challenges we're facing in building the future on purpose, I think there are numerous challenges and also numerous opportunities. For me, I think it's about creating that groundswell of buy-in, particularly in the private sector. So, obviously this site in South Australia provides a very interesting, as you pointed out, moment in time, quite unique, generational game changer. But I also know in interacting with many private sector companies, you start talking about purpose and the eyes glaze over and there's the recognition, well, how does this contribute to my bottom line? And I think it's about, the real challenge is getting that buy-in and getting people to understand that this actually has a long-lasting impact. So you need to find where those niche pain points are, and often they're in, I think, in problems that are recurring historically in organisations or in industries that are just never being solved. And for me, I think, and because I am, in a people-oriented business, I think eventually it comes back to there's something wrong in the machinery about how we're engaging, leading, training, equipping people for the future. I think the piece is in that, because to me that's the enduring thing. If I think about the comments you made about all the things in our world that we're probably quite dismayed about, they really come down to people. So I think it's convincing the hearts and minds is the biggest challenge.
That's very good insight. So building on that, Louise, when you think about the purpose economy and the need to start up, and this builds on what you were saying before, and scaling up and then staying up, what advice have you got for our state as we set our ambition for a future of purpose?
I think advice for the state is that we actually acknowledge how complex the social ecosystem is. We know that ecosystems are highly complex in themselves, but when you actually add social to it, it has a whole other layer. So I think we're just acknowledging that to start with. I think if we start with acknowledging there, we then think about what do we need to do to move forward in that space and ensure that we're putting the investment at the heart of that. I was very lucky very lucky. The reason that we were so successful in startup is that we had a local angel investor. So I think that we shouldn't always turn to the solutions of, the traditional ways of funding startups for social purpose, and I think that those that focus that we must get government funding and we must have all those players on board are really going to struggle. We need to find other ways in which we can have investors really, and the concept for angel investing that means for me is that they believe in the person. So I had someone that believed in me before I had any proof of concept. So I think that we need to really focus on, if we are going to drive that future on purpose, is that we need investment on people that are actually going to take the risk. I left a job that I loved, but I was highly frustrated. So I took all that risk, and I think that people need to match that investment with going, this isn't normal. People wouldn't take all of that risk to show that there is another way. So I think we need to just think about investment that way. When it comes to growth and scale, that's when we need wraparound support. We need the most wraparound support at that time. So we need investment up front. We need to look at different ways to invest. Then we need the wraparound support of those that are just highly skilled in so many facets in the areas that we don't necessarily think of, because we need to make sure that when we are scaling or for purpose is that we're actually aligning. We're aligning with the growth of the economy and the growth of the industries, because otherwise we'll get left behind. And I worry about that. I think, we're a very young organisation, and while there are so many other broader growth strategies, people partner with us to ensure that we can align there, because I feel then we are going to be able to grow successfully. When it comes to being able to stay up, I think all we can do is participate. So participate in people's brands. So we are really wanting to push something that's called a brand-led companies, ones that are driving for change around purpose. We don't like to call ourselves a charitable organisation. Yes, we've got charity status as Kick Innovation, but we're brand-led. So the way in which that helps it to be much more tangible for customers. You can come in, you can buy your coffee with us, you can purchase the things that we're going to do. But I think it's the combination of those, because we need to make sure that those brand-led companies are able to advance themselves, so our young people that we engage can advance themselves at the heart of technology and growth industries and not leave them behind.
Wonderful story, thank you. Natalie, the Mars Innovation shopfront, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and Ilse has described with us over the last few weeks, what advice do you have for developing a successful shopfront for commercialisation of research and IP management in the state, and the possibilities for something similar to Mars Innovation?
Talk about the challenging question. Look, I think it's a critical capability that we need to have as part of this precinct. It's a complex role in looking at how Mars is set up. There's a lot of facets to it that really do de-risk the whole path to being able to be successful at launching a product or launching a company as the next step on. I think that as a state, we invest a lot in public research. Only a small proportion of that sees the light of day in terms of things that you and I would interact with. So I think there's an opportunity as well as a need to do this. The question, I suppose, is how to do it, because I think it's quite a complex thing to take on. So I unfortunately don't have the answer to that, but I think having a cohesive shop front of sorts that makes it easy for people to get the help and support they need, and the more capability in this area the better, is really important. I think the other piece to this, beside the functional, how do we take something, understand whether or not it's got value, and then build a path to market, is what markets are we trying to build to? And I'd add the comment that I think it's important that as a state and arguably as a nation, we need to be thinking about some of those key sectors that we want to be playing into as a strategic coordinated approach where we're looking at ourselves, the assets we have in this state and nationally, and how we can harness them to create a distinctive offering, not only that's here in Australia, but that is exportable. And the more that we can bring that global, bigger picture thinking to the work we're doing locally, the easier it will be to build that collaborative environment we need and the scale we desperately need to be able to really kick our economy forward from a productivity point of view. They're probably my main points.
Excellent. So a segue, it's a nice segue to this question that is open to the three of you. And Ilse referred in her oration to the other hubs or innovation areas that we have, Tonsley as an example, or the bio precinct down the road, and the opportunity to connect all of those hubs, all those areas. And so what do you think, or any comments from the three of you in terms of the future relationship between what might happen in this site and the existing innovation precincts at Tonsley or other places?
I mean, personally, I think it's a no-brainer, if I can be blunt, and say that I mean, the beauty of what is yet to be discovered, I think we tend to agree is going to come through collaboration and having the conversations and figuring out what needs to be solved and invented. And I think I mean, we are blessed with the issue of, I think we still call ourselves a 20-minute city, or, you know, close to whatever the rhetoric is now. I just think there is such a brains trust of great businesses and innovators and entrepreneurs in South Australia. We'd be absolutely silly not to look at some sort of blended model that still honours the distinction of the sites, but absolutely capitalises across it. I don't know how to do that. I'm happy to be part of the solution.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that coordination's key. So if we know, I mean, we talked about earlier through Oration, you know, the need for vision, the need for leadership. Those things I find are seriously lacking a lot of the time when I'm looking to understand who's going to take the lead, particularly on the market side for a lot of the work we do as a university. So there's a lot of fragmentation that makes it really hard to scale. And so the more that we can understand that we are a small country relative to global countries, but we've got a lot of things to offer, and if we can start coordinating and collaborating in state more, we'll be able to generate a lot more impact and in a faster time frame that's really critical right now. When I think about SAMRI, there's fabulous opportunity where we've got collaboration happening already. How do we coordinate that from a governance point of view to really drive and focus those precincts on strengths that are distinctive to the way that they were set up, the markets they're serving, learn from that and build momentum across all of them.
Louise, any comments?
I would have to agree with both, and I think there's just an opportunity. We always look at what the opportunity in the market is when you're looking at, you know, how we can move forward, and this is it now. So it's an opportunity, and I'm sure for many people and stakeholders that has been something, and all those challenges that they've thought around how do we collaborate more, how do we get the best ingenuity and innovation. We know that when you come together you can scale for impact, and I think now we have the opportunity, so grab it.
Terrific, thank you. So I think that the opportunity here at the RA site is much bigger than just this precinct. So now, Ilse, this is your opportunity to ask our panellists some questions. Have you got a question for any of the three ladies here?
I love being on a panel with so many women. So
I know.
One of the things that we've been very focused on at Mars is to intentionally bring more women into the innovation ecosystem broadly. But one of the areas where jurisdictions everywhere struggle is to get more women involved in kind of high growth young businesses. And we know that those businesses are the sort of job engines of modern economies. And that if women are not part of creating those businesses or being part of the leadership team of those businesses or being part of the product and service strategies of those businesses, that it's hard to see how we're going to meet our goal of achieving purpose. So I wonder, just from your perspective, and when I look at Paul's data, the participation rate of women in entrepreneurial startups in South Australia is very low, even compared to the rest of Australia. Any thoughts, observations about that, and what can intentionally be done to try and move that needle?
I'm happy to start. I couldn't agree with you more. I think I'm one of the minority. When you say I was a female CEO that also was lucky enough to have an angel investment, it's almost a little bit unheard of. And I think that I might as well do a little plug for Collab for Good. So we're about to open up for that space. So we really there's 4 founding women. So ones that we believe that are leading the space for social entrepreneurship here in Adelaide. And when we broached Renewal SA to set that up, completely open, engaged, and really wanted to be part of that. So I think there's that, again, the opportunity, and I think we must just be able to, as women, work with each other. So the space is really about people to be able to come in and get great mentorship and really try. We've got to focus on female founders and social entrepreneurs, and anyone that has a brand for purpose. And I think that we've come together collectively to really bring our Fab 4, our 4 ingredients of power together, because we can't do it alone. And all of us have been supporting each other for quite some time to support our own purpose. So now we've got a wonderful place here that we can really lead the way in doing that.
If I can just chime in on you raising that subject, we deliver a lot of development programs overseas, mainly in the Asia Pacific region, into quite incredibly challenging environments. We're talking, isolated areas in Sri Lanka and less than optimal living conditions in parts of Tonga. And a lot of the focus of the programs that we deliver are around women's economic empowerment. And so we're often working in regions where a female in the family has never thought that she could earn income to contribute to the household, potentially in environments where young girls have been pulled out of school, or not even gone to school. So the approach of our programs is designed to ensure that people like that aren't left alone and left out of these programs. And it really starts with winning the hearts and minds of the communities. So whilst that's a really very different example to say what we might see in Adelaide with women and entrepreneurs, it still comes back to that issue of attitudinal shift and acceptance. I was fortunate. I went to an all-girls school and was fortunate to be able to be told at the time you can do anything. But many peers and colleagues that likewise were of the same era as me were not. And I think, and I know attitudes have changed, and the subjects that children are doing at school now are amazing, but I think that it needs to be approached on many levels, both at the schooling and the inspirational level. What you're doing here, I can fully see a group of, 10, 11, year 10, 11 schoolgirls coming in and being completely blown away with what's possible. But the whole ecosystem around that has to also shift, because startup entrepreneurs don't get bank finance. So everything's different.
Only a small point, I suppose. I think, and this is a personal opinion, that a lot of the branding around startups tends to be very tech-focused. And when I think about the whole conversation we're having tonight about purpose, it lends me to think that that's a driver of the feminine side of all of us. And I think often women, and we've got all sorts of issues in terms of equity, in leadership positions. And I think often that's called out as because, we're weaker, or we're too caring, or we're thinking of all these other things. We're not as hard-nosed in terms of negotiating. I'm not suggesting any of those things are right, but I think perhaps we've not pitched the idea of entrepreneurship and business making for purpose for women to grab onto as a concept yet. And it does feel a little bit like a boys' club if I was to look at how many people are spinning out businesses in our own business. It is very male-dominated. I think that purpose and the purpose economy creates a very different opportunity for a conversation about women taking on entrepreneurship as an endeavour and as a path to impact and a path to purpose.
And Robert, just to make that point absolutely in a tangible way. So at the launch of Mars, we launched a kind of a introductory program for aspiring entrepreneurs called Entrepreneurship 101, and initially, it had its tech focus in its particular streams, and then we ran a similar program for social entrepreneurs on the other side. And over time, we brought the social entrepreneurship program blended into the regular entrepreneurship education. We did not dumb down the business content at all, but we started to just showcase values-based businesses. And within 1 year, participation went from 30% to 50%. It was instant response. So you're absolutely right. A lot of it is language and just creating an environment where women feel like these are the kind of businesses I'd like to get involved in.
Great. Now, before we open the questions to the floor, this is the opportunity for our panellists to ask Ilse a question to get in before the crowd. So, we'll start with Natalie.
Okay. I've got so many questions, but I will just start with the one that's linked, I suppose, to how you grew the concept, this wonderful big vision, which obviously had great leadership to help it to actually manifest itself in a great strategy. You talked about the pathway to execution being one that's a tough one. Yeah. How did you grow from those failures, and how important were those failures as much as the successes along the way?
Yeah, well, I think what I tried to capture is because of the way Mars evolved, and honestly, again, why this site seems like such an opportunity. We had to actually go buy the site with philanthropy. The hospital then had to be decommissioned, and then we had to raise the money to start doing the development. So a lot of the early energy of the founding group was really consumed by just kind of getting the first phase of the infrastructure built. And I think what was interesting there is it almost made a lot of people in the community then said, well, it's just an infrastructure project, partly because, honestly, Mars had no employees. It was a bunch of volunteers trying to build a giant building with no business model. So there were a lot of really hard lessons there to then begin to kind of get the buy-in of the community of this is not actually, the whole point of the infrastructure is to serve the mission, not the other way around. But part of that was just the practical reality. So we truly, had to use all of the elements of constraint and operating in a very tight, constrained environment, and literally added employees one at a time. What I tried to highlight in my talk is, if this is truly about innovation, and we're not just implementing a recipe, we have to leave room for that evolution, and particularly if you're trying to work in leading edge areas, you have to try some stuff and triangulate across a lot of emergent points, just like business leaders do. And your governance model and your operating model needs to actually say, this is our business, this is the business we're in. And so when you think about it that way, of course, the failures along the way are just kind of part of a natural process. You don't overthink them either. Yeah. You're trying to find points of movement and points of momentum. And I think it's really hard for people to get their head around that, because, and this is the biggest thing I think we all have to get our own expectations of this project or anything we're dealing with in the purpose economy. It's complex, it takes time. You need alignment around, from multiple stakeholders. None of us can tackle any of these issues on our own. So you have to use that sort of problem and purpose piece to align the capacity of all the actors in the problem space. But the mindset of just saying, this is the business we're in. We have to create an organization that's designed for that journey. Yeah. And of course it has to be accountable, and of course it has to do all of those things, but it needs room to actually innovate. Yep. And then constantly remind ourselves that it's never done. This is the thing about innovation. It doesn't matter what you're doing day to day in your own universe. The rest of the world is just marching on. And so if we want to maintain any kind of leadership role or be at the forefront, we have to constantly be innovating. And so this is a journey you have to stay on and constantly challenge yourself as things seem to stabilize and you take a breath. It's just like a plateau for the next set of hills.
Can I ask a follow-on question? Sure. Thanks, Rob. So as a leader in that business where adaptive strategy has been critical, so you've had to continually adapt, it'd be really hard to keep leading people because it's fatiguing. It's tough. It's, you know, you really have to have grit to keep moving through it. And as you, how do you keep inspiring people along that path? Is one question. The second is, at what point did you switch from the conversation being about the infrastructure to being about the people? Because having great facilities is one thing, but activating the vision through the connections that you're making in the precinct or the hub is really where the magic happens and the opportunity's born.
Yeah, good question. I mean, the good news actually was that I joined in January 2005, and it was about 9 months before we opened the doors and pretended the facility, first phase of the facility was done. It really wasn't. But I was not a real estate person. Honestly, I knew nothing. I know a lot about real estate now, more than I probably thought I needed to learn. But I was hired with that intention of activating, and so that was really, you know, what I focused on and really made sort of the priority in everything I did. I think this question of you know, leading organizations that need to become organisms that are all about collaboration, and again, where you don't have a neat and tidy product that you sell. Many of these organizations don't even have a traditional business model. So, and you have ups and downs, and trust me, we had ours. So it's exhausting. So first of all, I think stamina, sheer brute stamina. But the magical thing is, when your organization has a profound purpose, when you put that big idea and people feel that they're working on something that is extremely hard, but is so much bigger than themselves, you first of all attract extraordinary people because they join for the mission. I mean, they all left jobs and took jobs for half the salary to come and work at Mars. And they bring really unique capabilities, and that capability, the tougher it gets, the more that capability is unleashed because they're so committed to the purpose. So my absolute belief is, yes, innovation is fueled by purpose, but honestly, you know, the capability that we can bring to the fore on problems that people really deeply, deeply care about, we totally underestimate what teams can accomplish when they're in that kind of environment. And then your leading becomes just part of the heavy lifting, being part of the team, doing the work.
I think it's a very beautiful segue, because unlike you, I have just one question. As such an inspiring, leading woman entrepreneur, I hope this isn't too personal, but what is your why? What is your purpose? That, you know, I know that I think that's so important, and we talk with our young entrepreneurs around. First, we believe in our young people because no one's really believed in them before, but just to find their why. So that's my question to you. Sorry.
Perhaps having lived in this sort of innovation soil for a long time, I think what motivates me is to try and find a way to make sure we're ready for that future, and that as many people as possible can participate in that future. And, you know, although I have a deep inner geek and can talk technology with the rest of them, I think ultimately it is what we use this for, and how is that going to benefit not just the people in my circle, but the much wider community. And what was so inspiring, I think, about Mars and that big dream was that the original hospital was the site where insulin was discovered and first given to a young boy. And part of the big dream that was articulated, which is I think is quite an extraordinary, and at the time it really grabbed people, is to say, in its first century, this building gave the world insulin. And we now have to retool it for its next century. And it has to do something at least on that scale. And it was that sort of aspiration to not just make a difference at home, but to take the creativity and the creativity of an extraordinary privileged generation of Canadians living in an extraordinary privileged country out to the world. And when I look at the pace of change and the extraordinary challenges coming at us with automation of multiple sectors, the thing that is burning at me right now is, how many people are going to be able to really participate and get value from that future.
Thank you.
And that motivates me to keep tinkering at the edges.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll keep mine quick so we can open up to these wonderful people here waiting. I'm particularly enamoured by this feeling of how you inspire people around a grand big problem yet to be solved. If I take the insulin example, we're literally saying, everybody come here and do this and participate and devote your energy to co-creating something that we don't even know what the problem is that we'll solve in future years. So for me, what did you learn about, back to the question that I think I had, is what did you learn about convincing the private sector? What was the switch on to get that groundswell of private sector engagement, particularly in the early days?
One of the big advantages we had, partly because we had to raise the philanthropic money to buy the site, is that the business sector was brought in from the beginning. And the lesson from Mars is, do not underestimate the power of civic leadership. Just to give you one small story, Dr. John Evans that you saw in the picture there, he basically he wrote the first check himself, and then he went out to 14 other individuals to each write $1 million check within 2 weeks so they could stop the hospital from selling it to a condo guy. And when I arrived, we had a little function where we brought those 14 individuals, including some of Canada's most prominent business people, to a little function before we officially opened, to show them what their $1 million got them. And I remember one of the very curmudgeonly business leaders saying to me, "Oh, so this is what John Evans was talking about." He was talking about innovation. I had no idea what he was talking about. But it was John Evans asking, and I had $1 million. And honestly, it is, that went a long way. I would say we then skipped a few years where they were waiting for proof points. And the thing about ecosystems is there are no shortcuts. It's one small company at a time. It's one relationship at a time, and just weaving the fabric, right, constantly. But once the company started to mature, and they could see that there was real results coming out, we had a welcome kind of mat because of that history. And I think that's why I think it's really important to make sure that the business community, that is ultimately the piece that will pull these companies, young companies, into global markets, that they're part of the story. And that also, of course, shifts the conversation around innovation in the more established sectors. So, but you don't get there by just, spinning a yarn. You get there on reputation and proof points. That's just the reality. Now we make them pay to be part of the ecosystem.
Okay, thank you. Now we're going to open it up to the floor. So we do have some roving mics, I believe. Oh, okay. Still Christine's. So if I could, show of hands, and we'll get a mic to you. So please stand and say your name, ask your question, hopefully not a statement, and then to any of our panellists.
My name is Jane Muzzard from the Council on the Ageing. I love the focus on diversity. I love the focus on women. One of the groups that I think at the moment we're struggling to get a nose in are older people who, and we know innovation is ageless. It isn't related to being young. But I'm just wondering what your experience, Ilse, is of your huge vision about participation and benefit across a whole range of people. How do you make sure that this is a space that is truly ageless?
It is one of my pet topics because there's so much mythology around this entrepreneurship space that, you know, all of these companies are started by obnoxious 18-year-old college dropouts, male, which is of course not true. I mean, the data tells us the most successful startup companies, average age is somewhere between 39 and 42 for their first successful company. That, you know, so I think the good news about what we've tried to do is just create an environment that is open to anybody. And what we found in our entrepreneurship programs, although we work very closely with the universities and have huge participation of students, grad students, young academics, we see the absolute full demographic. And of course, as the world's changing, we're increasingly also seeing people who are in you know, transition between having had a job and the market changed, or they realize there's a problem out in the market and they want to start to solve that problem. So we have a huge demographic in our community, and in fact, growing participation among older entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, people who want to get involved in a young company and support it in many, many ways. So I think it's just creating an open environment that has on-ramps, not just for people of different ages, but genders, backgrounds, context. That's what I was trying to say in my oration, you know. Diversity is a fact. Inclusion takes work. So, you have to be intentional.
We have a question at the back, and there are some other hands that Moira is taking note of, so you'll get to there.
Hi, I'm Richard Push, musician, and I'm very interested in your concepts of innovation, diversity and all that. What role do you see cultural activities playing in this process?
Absolutely essential. So, you know, although our hardcore support services are partly just because of a volume issue now, are focused on typically businesses that have a bit more of a technology content to them. We see Mars as a city building institution with entirely porous boundaries. And so we take our programs out, we bring all the cultural stuff in. You would not be surprised that many of our top scientists are also top musicians. And so trying to create an environment where, you know, the flow of creativity is not defined, but essentially is a fluid piece of everything, and introducing some fun. So musical performances, musical events, theater, all kinds of crazy stuff happen. We're part of all the city festivals, all of that sort of stuff. It's absolutely essential. And, you know, such an opportunity for Adelaide.
Rose, yep.
Hi, my name's Sue Gilby, and I'd just like to say to the panel that I heard on radio advertised just recently that on a recent Saturday there was 200,000 jobs advertised and there were 700,000 people going for them, and that wasn't counting the underemployed or casual people. So I'd like to ask the panel, do you think it's time that we looked at things more like our circular economy and perhaps our universal basic income? And I've just got a final thing that I'd like to ask the panel is, do they think that South Australia becoming a preferred weapons manufacturer is innovative?
Who wants to take that?
I'll start with the employment. I'm not answering the last bit. I probably will spin it on its head, and I think as we move forward, and the new labour market that we have to look at, we've actually got to look at job creation rather than job seeking. So, and that's not an answer. I mean, it's not to say, I mean, it's so complex, so there needs to be several different approaches and a lot of people getting together to provide innovative solutions. And let's not go back on what we've tried before or thinking that we've tried before, because I don't think it would work. But we really strive to look at how can people create their own jobs. How can we really have people to be job creators rather than job seekers? And I think Garmin Bank is an amazing example of how we can provide microfinancing to people to actually then finance their own work and their own small businesses, because micro businesses, there's a heart for it. I don't think we always have to think extremely large and big companies that have to employ a lot of people, but we just need a lot of people participating in the economy. I'm not answering the last one.
Anybody prepared to take the last one? Okay, other questions?
Hi, my name is Michael. Just a question, Ilse, I was really intrigued by one of the slides that you had, which was one of the 3 interconnected cogs, I think. And I was wondering how they would actually work as a threesome. And it occurred to me that they probably couldn't. As soon as they tried to turn, one would eventually snap. And it just struck me that with any huge endeavour like this, you're going to get factors, you're going to get entities giving the appearance of working together and doing the right things and saying the right things, but in fact working against the ultimate aim. Given your time here, just in the last fortnight, say, I was wondering what you saw as the biggest threats, the biggest problems that we might be facing in what we're trying to achieve here, where they give the appearance of wanting to achieve the same aim but in fact aren't.
Well, it's interesting, that picture. The reason why I put that picture up is because honestly, and this is not a statement on the mechanical, how sound the mechanical interface is, but the reason why I put that picture up is actually that developing Mars felt a bit like that. And it is like you had the gear of the academic system and the startup system and the big business system and the capital and the policy, you know, all these gears were kind of turning on their own momentum. And then what you get when you're trying to advance a kind of a complex ecosystem where you need all these pieces, for a while there, they're all a little bit out of sync and it feels like there's sand everywhere. And then they engage, and you see literally the growth is like this, and then you go up, and then you stay there a little bit more, and then you go up again. And it's, it really has felt like that, so I apologize if that offended somebody who's more mechanically sophisticated than me. You know, I think the challenge with any modest-sized jurisdiction is that, you know, we tend to talk to each other and talk to ourselves. And I think the process is the process of shifting mindset to really realize the intent, and this is what Mars has given me, honestly, this view of what the rest of the world is doing with innovation. And I wake up in a cold sweat thinking we're sleepwalking in this process. And you know, you look at the data and you see how hard we're working on all this. And as a country, Canada, and I haven't looked at Australia's data, but we're slipping. And it's not that we're doing the wrong things, it's that everybody else is doing more. And part of that kind of, you know, realigning is you need the big vision of how can we control our destiny? Because as a small jurisdiction, you're a cork in the ocean, and you are buffeted by the forces of the world. So what part of this can you own and hold on to and develop in a way that you want to develop it? And that's sort of what I'm really focused on. But what that means is you've got to be really honest about what you have in terms of assets, where the shortcomings are, and then you've got to look out. All of us together have to look out into the world rather than look at each other. And that's, I think, the mind shift of just sort of becoming more aware of the intensity and what the impact is on, potential impact on our community if we don't grab onto this with some level of confidence, but also, you know, using every bit of the capacity we have collectively because we're small. And that's sort of what I think Mars is, in a way, catalyzed that conversation, because it was just this big project that was trying to do something globally relevant. And honestly, a lot of naysayers said, it's crazy, it's too big, it's white elephant, you know, it's not going to work. But it shifted the perception of what is it going to take for us to actually be a player that has some control over the, you know, over our future and can contribute something to the world, which is our human obligation.
I have another question here. I think we've got time for at least another couple. There's one more after this one.
Thank you. David O'Loughlin, Mayor of the awesome city of Prospect. Oh, so people tell me. You had me at hello with this idea, something I've been espousing for a while. We've got a bit of a track record out in Prospect to trying to dabble in this stuff. I'm interested in the cultural, behavioural, psychological change that needs to be made. Your summary of the foundation stones for why this is a good idea for us, they're very, very sound. But let me just put that back to you another way. We have 6, 7 university campuses right in this CBD. We have an amazing health precinct. We have most of the business leaders in the state. We have all of the commerce and finance right here in this CBD, fantastic cafes and restaurants, beautiful weather. Why isn't this happening now? What do we need to change about ourselves to switch this light on and do this, not just talk about it, to do it? And what difference will a building make to make that happen?
They can answer that first part of the question. I think the major thing you have to do is not think about this as a building. This is a platform and its job is to enable innovation. And it's a place where people from all across that continuum and life cycle of innovation come and participate and together accelerate each other's efforts. So it doesn't own innovation. The building is really in service of that much larger enabling function. And it needs to, that's why this, you know, the organization itself is about implementing the mission. And the building is part of the toolbox. But I think that's the way you have to think about it. And then it holds a network that all kinds of other things become possible. So just as one tangible example, we have 150 organizations in our complex. About half of them I would describe as startups or young companies, but we provide intense support to 1,200 companies that are located across the entire equivalent of our state and now increasingly across the country. So the building becomes a vessel for collaboration across multiple aspects, and it has to take that holistic view to actually be that catalytic player. Otherwise, I think that's where I think this project will not fail, but it could be suboptimal, and that's, you know, that's the missed opportunity.
Thank you. I think it's a sensational question, but I think the key, as you've outlined, is to not think of the building as the centre of the being, but simply the vehicle for behaviour change to potentially commence. But it goes back to, I hate leaving an unanswered question, but I didn't want to tackle the defence one, but to Sue's question about, her comment about, you know, 700,000 applicants for 200,000 jobs just makes your heart break, first of all. And the industry, you know, the potential concern about the expertise in our state being directed in certain sectors, you know, and I won't give an opinion on that, but to simply say, clearly what got this state to here isn't going to get us to the next stage of its development, because clearly there are many things that haven't worked, that have slipped, that we have gone backwards in, that are broken. And I don't want to talk about the negatives entirely, because just as you pointed out, there are wonderfully many other things to celebrate. But clearly, you know, over many years, what us got to this point won't get us to the next stage. We will slip further. So some of those big social problems of severe unemployment, of jobs growth being in very predetermined sectors, which are very necessary for the state's economy for a period, surely we can think about resolving the next phase of the state's development in some other way, not in the decision making we had in the past. And potentially this is a way for different forms of collaboration that we've never dreamed of coming out.
I'm happy to also chip in with a controversial statement. We were asked to challenge, thinking. I think, bluntly, we're fat and lazy. So I think we're really, really used to trading off some great investment, great collaboration and great innovation from 100 years ago. We've been living the high life for a long time, able to do that in relative isolation, and it's not enough anymore. And I think the bit that needs to change culturally is the realisation that we actually have a burning platform at the moment. We're working hard and we're not reaping the benefit because we're doing too much Me Too catch-up, and we're not even aware that we're at risk. And I think it's a risk to the society, to business, to the university sector. We actually need to come together, and I think this building and the purpose around the building, not the building, is the opportunity to bring a common vision, a common purpose, and a reason for wanting to work together versus working locally. And we compete with each other even locally. When the globe is so big, it's moving so fast, the challenges are huge. We don't have famine at our doorstep. We do have water supply issues, but we don't really grasp them in the sense that it could also be affecting other people in the world. And the inventive, ingenious ways that we're thinking about water have mass applicability if only we think about not fighting with the guy down the street, but instead collaborating and thinking about the global stage we want to be on.
Last question.
Oh, great. Look, thanks very much, Ilse. I've really enjoyed your presentation and that of the panel. I just wanted to ask you a bit more to explain some of the outcomes of collaboration between government, universities, the not-for-profit and the private sector. What needs to happen in this space to make it a success, to make it more than just another co-working space?
Yeah, I think one of the messages, I certainly, and perhaps this is just, having lived through it, is to not underestimate how challenging building the software that goes with the hardware of the building is, to foster those collaborations. Where we've had the most success in those multi-sector participations is, again, to align around a common problem that everybody agrees is the problem, and no one party has the answer. One of the reason why we brought 15 academic institutions together to pool all their intellectual property was to put the data on the table of how do we perform in the research, how do we perform in commercialization. This is a really ugly picture. Maybe we need to rethink the model and then co-develop the model that we were all agreed we were going to test. But again, we didn't wait for consensus. We then said, okay, we have a coalition of the willing. We're going to start, and it's always open to anybody else, but we're not going to wait till everybody agrees to the lowest common denominator execution plan, which is often what happened when collaboration itself becomes kind of the goal. So we've had some really, really interesting collaborations, particularly on the sort of other side of those of you who've heard me talk, startups and research and great ideas that are making their way towards the market is kind of the supply side of the innovation process. The other part of the problem we realized we had to work on was actually we need to get our innovations adopted by our own systems. And there again, looking at the evidence of our healthcare system, which in the case of Ontario, the equivalent sort of state, 14 million people, largest item in the provincial budget, over 10 years had not purchased one made in Ontario technology. because we think of our healthcare system as a system that takes care of sick people. We don't think of our healthcare system as part of growing the next economy. And so when that data was put on the table, it didn't look good for the health system. It certainly was a massive source of frustration to innovators, both in large companies but also in smaller companies. And the academic partners were essential because we needed really good data on whether these emerging technologies work. We don't want our health system to buy something that is stupid just because it's local. So it became, and then we had to bring the regulator to the table to also make sure that we didn't, we modernized the procurement mechanisms. But if you think about it from the innovator's perspective, we expect those companies to scale into global companies, but we don't give them any local test bed. And so when they go to Europe or they go to the US, the first question they get is, well, what does your local health system think about your product? And they're like, there's nobody home that I can talk to. So that was a problem that everybody recognized. It was painful. But at least we all aligned that this was a problem worth solving, and everybody worked together to bring their piece of the solution over time. And the value, and honestly something I underestimated initially, the value of Mars as the neutral body that wasn't like any of the other people around the table, whose job it was to facilitate these collaborations, and honestly, who was prepared to be the workhorse. Because it's not glamorous work. This is just block and tackle. That was hugely, hugely helpful, because honestly, that collaboration would not happen if it was just on the edge of everybody's desk around the table. Everybody would go back and be consumed by what else they had on their agenda. So creating that, catalyst with agency, and that can actually be the broker and speak the language of all the parties and do the grunt work. But, once you get one or two of these working, then all of a sudden people are like, oh, look what we did. And nobody takes credit, and then you tackle another big problem. But you got to get the alignment around the problem set, and then create the tools and the capability and the infrastructure to do it. And it's always hard, always takes longer than you like, all of that.
Thank you. I find that fascinating, that to remember that Mars is an independent, not-for-profit organisation that owns the site, curates the site, and is able to bring the collaboration to bear. And that's something for us to think about as we move forward with this site, I guess. That draws the conclusion to the questions, and I'd like to thank our four ladies on the panel and the questions that were offered up. Great insights. There will be an opportunity to network after we conclude. My final words here: the Dunstan Foundation has other major projects and that were mentioned earlier, and the Adelaide Zero project is having a community briefing on homelessness to share the results of the state's first Connections Week, where all the partners in the Zero project will go out and identify by name everyone sleeping through rough in the city. It will take place on the 17th of May at Adelaide Uni, and details are also on the DDF website. I'd like to extend a wonderful congratulations and thanks to the Dunstan team for putting all of this together. This is hard work for 3 weeks, so congratulations to all of them. And in particular, David, Kate and Rose, they have put an extraordinary effort in the last 3 weeks. I'm not sure they got any sleep at all, and it's just been constant. The slides from tonight, as well as the speech and the various presentations Ilse has given over the last 2 weeks, will be available on the DDF website. There is a video of tonight's oration, so that's also available on the YouTube channel. So if you want to watch that again, please feel free, along with all the other videos of previous thinkers that we've had out. And so I encourage you to spread the message, the networks that you have, spread the learnings and the insights that you've gained tonight, and talk more about this important topic. So thank you, and thank you for coming tonight, and thank you once again to the ladies and the